Old friends, John and Mark are here again. We appreciate your time as always. First, I'll just sort of try to frame it. And we gave, this is basically a preview of the DRC Design Review Committee slide deck that we're going to be sharing at DRC on Wednesday. We gave this to UBA. There's a few people from UBA here, I see, so they saw it on Friday. When we left off, it was the Planning Commission. It was early September last year, and not much has happened since then. There were a few items that community members, including UBA, asked us to study that we'll get into that a little bit later. But we don't have like architecture or massing or any of that stuff to show today. What happened in terms of procedure is we had talked a bunch about a zoning overlay last time. We thought that was kind of the solution to dealing with the history of the site. And planning has since come to us and said, no, we don't like the zoning overlay solution. We like design guidelines. There are a lot of different factors influencing development at the site, whether it's us or someone down the road. And they would like some design guidelines created by some urban designers to help give form to that. And then the architecture would follow and the massing would follow out of that. So we just sort of kind of slowed down. We didn't want to get ahead of that because that really needs to go first. And this presentation, most of you could probably get it. It's kind of how do we get here to where we are today? And then what are the things influencing what's going to happen on the site? So I'll give this, it's probably about 15 minutes or so, and then we can open it up and answer any questions. And also, in terms of where we are in the process, as everyone probably remembers, there's 2 tracks happening at once. There's the CEQA, which is often the longest track, and then there's just general entitlements and planning review. So CEQA, there's 4 rounds of back and forth between the consultant and planning, and then they issue a draft EIR. And then after the draft EIR, there's hearings, there's planning commission and landmarks, public comment, and then they go back and there's 4 more rounds of back and forth until they're done. And then we're ready for actual hearings about the project itself. And so they're just finishing draft 2 of 4. So it means consultant, and I think planning has given their comments to the consultant for the second time. So there's 2 more, and then it gets issued. Last fall, I said June I was expecting. That sounds aggressive to me now, based on where we're at. So July or August would be nice. Now that probably means we're getting.
Is that going to be when
the
draft comes out, or is that when you're going to start the actual hearings?
Oh, the draft. Yeah. We've got a long way to the hearing still. So okay. That's draft EIR, and then we have hearings about the draft EIR, and everyone gives their comments. And so I think for the actual hearings on the project itself, it's probably early, Q1 or Q2 next year. Hopefully, we're in year 5, as you probably remember. We started in 2017. We're in 17, 18, 19, 20. We're in 21 now. So that is kind of where we're at in that process. And let me answer one more thing. So originally, after a year and a half or so of outreach, we proposed the tower, and then got a lot of feedback, and then a year later removed the tower, maxing out 85 feet, approximately 450, 460 units. We submitted an application based on that. We did want planning or the environmental to review the tower. Not that we are proposing the tower now, but we wanted that review because the work's already been done by CEQA. And maybe suddenly everyone on city council wants a tower. We still need to go through approvals for that, but since the CEQA work's done, we don't want to lose that. And there's a lot of voices saying, hey, we want to get as much housing as possible, including a tower. So planning was going to study that as an alternative. And then we were given direction that no, because it's going to have, alternatives are meant to have less impact than your general project description. So they said, if you want it studied by CEQA, change your project description to include a variant, and that variant is the tower. So anyone who's monitoring our submissions, we recently submitted something that had the same project description of last year, 85 feet, plus a tower in the exact same location as the earlier tower, the 2018 tower, because it's already been studied. Same thing for wind and shadow and whatnot. So you're probably going to hear dialogue, maybe there'll be questions tonight, and there are a bunch at UVA. There may be discussion about it at DRC, but our intention is to have it studied as part of the environmental track, but that's not what we're actually asking to be voted on by the Planning Commission. Okay, with that, my share screen usually has,
let me.
Leonora, could you let me share my screen?
I'm not sure if you have that. Just a second. Let me. Here we go.
And it's going to take me like 2 tries. I've sort of, my system is that it never works the first time. Okay, I'm going to try this.
Oh, you got it.
I'm going to go Zoom, and then it's not going to work. So I'm going to stop share, and then I'm going to screen share. And now do you see full screen?
Yes.
Great. Okay. Okay, everyone knows this photo, this historic photo. So this is a description of how this 15 minutes or so is going to go. I'm going to go through the goals of the project that'll be familiar to you. How has the project evolved? What are these layers of influence that would inform any development on the site? How does that affect the layout of the site? And finally, what's happening with the design guidelines? Okay. Well, as you all know, through the prior 4+ years of speaking, it seems a pretty broad consensus on what the goals here are. We've got this amazing 4-acre gem that's pretty closed off and kind of overgrown and private. Our goal is to open it up and to have it be an asset for the community. We also want to honor the legacy of both the estate era and the campus era. This is a prime housing opportunity site. There's been very little new housing in Rockridge in generations. It's located 10-minute walk from BART. This is really a great opportunity. And we want to do all this in an environmentally sensitive manner. This is probably a familiar slide to you. So in fall of 2018, after a year and a half of dialogue, we unveiled a plan that had 590 homes. It included a 19-story tower and included buildings surrounding the park. We heard a lot of feedback. Some people really liked the tower, I should note, including the mayor, but a lot of people, including planning, pushed back and didn't like it. And so by the fall of 2019, we revised our proposal. We took out the tower, and we now max out at 85 feet. We also took out the southern building, building D, we call it, on the south side of the park. Really just opened up the park. It's going to get a lot of sunlight. We also took a couple of floors off the back of the building behind Mackey Hall. So I just want to be clear. So the project variant still includes the tower, but that's not what we're submitting for actual approval. And this is just an elevation from College and Broadway. At the top, of course, is the tower. The bottom, no tower, and a bigger park. 2020 was about the charrette and then doing a feasibility study. Planning said, we want you to look at 10 of the 12 buildings on site, do the highest and best use analysis, and figure out what you can preserve. And they acknowledge that, hey, if we're going to talk about a good number of housing on the site, which it would include parking, the only place to put that building and really that parking is going to have to be down here because of the slope and the quarry underneath. It's got to go above ground, and you need to really, for circulation, that is the spot. So they said, we're going to grant you that, so assume for your analysis, say Simpson doesn't remain there. We then did an exhaustive plans and specs and bid it out to a couple companies, did a market study, a number of them, and ended up really in March of last year, right before COVID, with a pretty historic document. We at that moment in time, we know what it would have cost to do all this stuff. And as you probably remember, scenario 1, the most housing, it saves the 2 National Historic Register buildings, buildings, a lot of the historic landscape. We get 4 homes. It's the only where we can do the on-site affordable. The project doesn't pencil anymore if we provide it on-site for options 2 and 3. Options 2 and 3 save 3 additional buildings. The third one keeps carriage in place. So there's office. Both of those involve in lieu fee. And option 3, we would even need a subsidy. A year ago, we would need an additional $5 million from some source. That number would probably be a lot higher today. The residential rents are down over 20%. Office is probably just as much. So that's the past. That's where we've been. Planning has asked us to, and then really the consultant doing the design guidelines to look at the various layers of influence and figure out how they can work together, because sometimes they conflict. How do you prioritize them? How do you create something that's new? This is going to be a new use. Like we've had 2 eras on the site. There's going to be a 3rd era that we hope is fantastic. And it should incorporate this stuff, but in a way that's not a Frankenstein, is what we've been told. So the 4 eras are the estate era, the campus era, the neighborhood context. It's not an era, but it's a layer of influence. And then finally, the Broadway corridor guidelines. Going through them one at a time. First, the estate era. This is 1870 to 1920, about half a century. You've got a couple Queen Anne National Historic Register buildings, Mackey and Carriage. You've got the Broadway wall, which includes the stairs and the gate. You've got the view corridor. So as we know, we used to be able to see Mackey Hall. There's an 80-foot wide view corridor that's gone today, but it can come back. Eucalyptus Road, that's where the carriages would come up and the line with eucalyptus. There's also these Carnegie bricks all over the site. Moving to the campus era, a lot of that is defined as where do they put the buildings, because they kind of kept a building over the decades. And what we're left with is kind of a meandering, sort of sinuous path experience. There's also an overlook that's got views of both bridges, both downtowns, and a purposeful use of Mackey lawn. I really program that. And you got the landscape. Almost all the landscape, other than the eucalyptus trees, are from the campus era. And there's some really wonderful and large specimens that lend a lot of character to the site. There's also a lot of cultural landscape. There are a lot of these sculptures and statues that tell the story of different eras, different decades of the campus, and really talk about the campus. And then there's the architecture. There are 4 buildings that are not on the National Historic Register, but are considered possibly eligible for the state register. 3 of those are right around 1970. It's the Brutalist Founders Hall, Martinez Hall, and Treadwell, the Sculpture Studio, and one from the 1990s. That's the Glass Block Simpson Studio by Jim Jennings. Okay, that's the second influence. The third is the context. A lot of the context is Rockridge. Rockridge, we often think of craftsmen, and there's certainly a lot of craftsmen. But you go down College Avenue, and you kind of go, in both directions from the site, and you get a lot of eclecticism. There's a lot of different styles. There's different size lots. There's big and small and different size buildings. That is all part of the context of the site. And then finally, Oakland does have corridor design guidelines that are meant to govern development along the corridors, and Broadway is a secondary corridor. All those 4 influences we're creating next public, how one does that in a graceful and effective manner. So we would look to those examples as the design guideline consultant will do. So how does this play out in the site plan? These are the 12 buildings on site right now. And of course, we've got the parking lot down here, Broadway and Clifton. The estate area, and this is what we're currently proposing to preserve. So we have about 55% of the Broadway wall and the stairs. We're proposing to save that, and of course the National Historic Register buildings, the view corridor, and the bricks, some of the bricks. From the campus era, a bunch of trees, a bunch of cultural landscape, some of the meandering pathways, the overlook, and the Mackey lawn, the purposeful Mackey lawn. Now layering them in, you sort of, you've got your 2 layers. It's starting to tell you, hey, where can there, if you want housing, where can that go? And this is really, building A and building B. It's not meant to be architecture or massing. It's just saying like, hey, you want to preserve these 2 eras, pay some homage to them, but you want to do housing that they're going to go in these 2 locations. And this is what that site plan is without the overlay. I mentioned earlier that there were 3 areas of study that we heard from neighbors, particularly UBA. The first here, they asked for more of the landscape and the trees to be saved to pick up on that meandering nature. We identified 3 coastal redwoods and a grove plus a Chinese elm. Up here, it would mean really, these things I really should use a caveat. We have not done all of our analysis. We began it and then we were hearing about the design guidelines, so we pulled off. But that's something which we hope we can achieve. And then the walling gate and activation, I'll talk about on the next slides. Many people, including UBA, have been consistent about asking to save the entire wall, not just what we were showing up to here. They said, hey, get rid of the commercial on the ground floor, set the building back, put in some townhouses, save the wall, also save the gate. We began the work on it. We're hopeful. We think there's probably a way to reconfigure the building. It's still preliminary, but that's where we're at right now. Another thing to kind of bookmark is that we do want handicap access, wheelchair access to the park. So there's probably going to need to be a hole in the gate somewhere to allow for that. Or not the gate, I'm sorry, the wall, not the gate. Park activation was the third element, and it was kind of in the form of the cafe. We've always shown the cafe on the corner here, Broadway and Clifton. UBA said, why don't you just move it down here next to the pathway? It'll bring people into the park. We've taken that one step further because we're looking at Founders Hall. That's the big brutalist building. If you've been on campus, you notice it drops several floors down. It just moves with the hill. It's massive. It's also structurally unsound. If it goes away, it's a challenge. You've got these big grading steps, but it's also an opportunity, which we realized in thinking about activation. We could program all different steps of that pad that's there and really help activate the whole site. We've always considered the carriage to be a carriage house to be a private space for amenity space for residents. We're now thinking we can open up the ground floor to the public. We would have coffee, coffee service down there. That could be a meeting space available for free to community groups such as yourself, if you wanted to move from the library, or maybe on a special occasion. And also a great place to do historic interpretive information about the college and the arts and crafts movement. And surrounding the cafe is just all this great outdoor seating with $1 million views of the bridges in the bay and the downtowns. And then the steep grade change, we're like, well, what about those kind of big terrace seating like they have at SF MoMA now and a lot of other places? It gets a lot of sun. It's a southern exposure. People sit out there, look at the view, enjoying the coffee. And then finally, and I want to caveat it, we haven't run this to the ground yet, but maybe a playground. We've heard a lot from a lot of people that Rockridge, despite all the families, is pretty playground poor. And that's going to get people coming up here. If you get a playground here, that's a cool playground. It's kind of these rock show, a place where mom and dad can grab the coffee and sit and watch. It sounds pretty cool. It'll be a great activator. So this is for study, but that's kind of what we're thinking as a possible way to activate the park. So the design guidelines. Some of the things we know they'll consider is the 2 different historic areas on the campus, the cultural landscape, the steep site topography, that view corridor, which was so magical, but is now missing. The edge condition, there's going to be a building here. If there's going to be a project, how is that building going to relate to Broadway and Clifton? And then the neighborhood context. This is where I would hand it off to Laura, who I'm sure you'll come to love. She I think they're the highest regarded kind of design guideline, urban design firm in the Bay Area. Oakland Planning, San Francisco Planning, both think great things. Some of their projects have done a cool melding of the historic, but the new, because what we're doing here is something new. We're creating a new era. So how do you do that in a sensitive manner? Pier 70 in San Francisco, they've come up with design guidelines there. Also 5M in San Francisco, approved 500 Kirkham, Patrick Henry's project. And San Jose, they also do stuff up in Napa and Sonoma. They're about sense of place. They view themselves as creator of places and spaces that are used by people and that work with the specifics of the site. Part of their process of, actually I'll get there in a second. There's also a historic architect on the team to help inform that process, and that's Frederick Knapp, who's done a lot of work in the Bay Area and East Bay. These are those four influencers I mentioned that they'll be considering, and all the different. There's just a lot of issues at play. There's a lot of stuff, and the preservation planner has asked us, do not create a Frankenstein. Do not just, okay, this is campus era, this is estate era, this is craftsman, this is core guidelines, like, and try to do everything in every part. Like, there's got to be some sort of prioritization, some sort of hierarchy. The idea is to create something that works and fits and is something for the next generation. And people believe that Site Lab is up to the task. John and I don't know what this project is, what the building's going to look like. We're excited. And Site Lab, they're not architects. They're not designing it. They're setting the rules for. And this is kind of how they describe it. The top here is, that's what's in the planning code. You got height, you got bulk, you got setback. Design guidelines get into more nuances, things like historic compatibility, the fine grain, rhythm and modulation, volumes, street wall, all that stuff. And that's what will be established with the goal of creating visual cohesiveness. And again, to make this a great place. I think we all want this to be a great place because it's such an important site. And the things that these design guidelines will include is open space and architecture, streetscapes, things like parking and loaning, and arts and signage. And there are other examples like Broadway Valdez, Pier 70, Brooklyn Basin design guidelines. And then this is Lauren Site Lab's approach. They're going to do a whole kind of listening tour, for lack of a better term, and they're going to want to talk to RCPC. And they're going to kind of figure out what is the outline of this document look like. They'll be generating some drafts. They'll be going to DRC. This is the first meeting this Wednesday, and that's just like a kickoff. They're going to be asking DRC for some guidance to help make sense of this and to prioritize. And then they know that we've been building stakeholders for 5 years, and they're going to, they're going to contact everyone and kind of make everyone, engage everyone in the process. And hopefully we end up with something that satisfies people for the most part. And then there'll be some architecture that follows that. It's not going to be there at the beginning, but it'll follow behind once we get going for a bit. And that's what we hope comes out of DRC ultimately. And then by the time the CEQA review and the EIR is done, we'll have a design guidelines that will stay with the site. After, say, our project never works and we go away, someone might come along in 10 years or 20 years, whatever it is, they would be governed by those design guidelines. So I'm going to stop the share now and open it up for questions.
Okay, I think there are a few enough of us here that we can just either, you want to just literally raise your hand, you can do that. If you want, you can use the raise hand, which I believe is under participants. Let me just check.
I think it's under reactions.
It's under reactions.
Yeah. Yeah, reactions.
Sorry.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and then that puts you up at the top there if you do that.
So anyone want to start the questions or comments? Yeah, Diana?
Yeah. Mark, I just want to, kind of get some clarity about the tower.
Right.
Okay, I know you've got the variant in there because you were asked to put it in and all. However, how high a tower are you realistically looking at putting in on that site?
So our proposal, I'm going to use that word as a distinguishing from the variant. Our
Right.
proposal is we're maxing out at 85 feet.
Okay, 85 feet.
85 feet. So that hasn't changed from the fall of 2019.
Mhm.
And that's what's in our, project proposal and all the plans that are publicly available. That's what was analyzed as option one.
Mhm.
Then the variant is the 190 feet. That it's the exact same tower. Planning for some reason has more floors than we're aware of and more feet. But if you actually look at the plans, it's the exact same tower that we submitted in the fall of 2018.
Okay.
Maybe it's where they're counting from, but it's like it's the exact same tower, just put on the new building A. And the
Okay.
goal there is that CEQA reviews it, and but that's not what's being processed by planning. And the design guidelines are going to have something to say about it, I imagine. They're going to say, wow, I don't know if 19 stories goes next to that. Or maybe they will be like, yeah, 19 stories could work if you did X, Y, and Z. I don't know. I don't know what it's going to say. But I think that's the avenue to sort of express opinions about it.
Just to
Okay.
clarify, is the number of units the same as when the 19-story tower was there before? Or is
It's
that,
actually, ironically, it's almost the same, although before it included the dorm, which we all know, is not part of the proposal. Now it's a functioning housing for homeless families and formerly homeless families and seniors.
Transitional.
Transitional.
Right.
Thank you. But because our building A footprint got larger than it originally was, we actually get to about the same count. It might even be 592 or 593 or something,
okay.
but it's roughly the same.
And what about the affordability component?
So the affordability is where we left off last year. What we said when we did the charrette for planning is, hey, if we can do the most housing and we're just saving 2 buildings along with the landscape, we could get to about 460 and we could do the on-site affordable. We could do the 10%. The other 2 versions, if we end up chopping the housing down to the low 300s, we just can't. Like, it's, as everyone knows, this is a very expensive site. All this site work, and we're creating an almost 2-acre park on a quarry. It's very expensive.
The affordability hasn't changed from the last time when you said it would be if there was less housing, there'd be in lieu fees instead.
Correct. Exactly. That hasn't changed. And the reason for it is it's like there's less of the market rate is what's paying for everything. If we have 25% less market rate homes, we can pay for a lot less. And that's what, it's either that or the park kind of thing.
Yeah. Jennifer,
you have a question?
Yeah, just one quick clarification with what Diana had asked, and then I have my question. So when you say it's the same tower as before, you're saying still the same height of like 190 feet? You're not saying 230?
Same dimensions. Like it's the same height, it's the same width, it's the same length, it's same volume.
Okay, well, the question I had is, I'm confused because you said planning said that if you want CEQA to review, you have to, you made some comment that if you want them to review it, you have to include the tower. But you also said that there's been already wind and shadow and other things studied. So it's like, have they reviewed it or not reviewed it?
Well, remember 2018, we submitted a project proposal that included the tower, and it included building D, and that was under CEQA review for a full year. They did they did a whole first draft of the draft TIR, and that work was all done on that that scenario that included the tower, and the tower in itself generates a number of studies, a shadow study, a view study, a wind study. That's why we made it the exact same volume. So that work, which was done in calendar 2019, didn't need to be redone.
Got it. Okay.
And the issue will be that if you want that to be part of the EIR, you have to include it. You can't include it as an alternative, so you include it as a variant.
Exactly, because planning has deemed that alternatives need to have less impact than the project description.
Right.
Right.
And a tower is more impact, there's
Okay.
more units, and so.
Yeah, Glenn?
Yeah, Glenn.
Okay, my interest is that I'm a neighbor. Our office is at 5278 College. We're in between what were two CCA buildings. We have a parking lot and a two-plus story building. We have plans to build that up. And we'd like to make it, we think that, we can make it fit in the existing zoning and bring it up to the height of the adjacent buildings. But in this, we want to make our building a zero net energy building. It would be probably a half a dozen apartments or condominiums, an office that we have currently, some sort of a retail or cafe on the ground floor, parking underneath and then back. But to make it zero net energy, we need to have full access to the sun. And our concern is that your building could shade our property. And that's a major concern. It also would shade, the first iteration showed shadow study going off into the residential neighborhood across the street. And we're being required by the state law to provide the energy on site that, that we need after all the conservation measures. So can you speak to that? How your project affects the neighbors?
You're talking in terms of shadowing primarily, right?
Especially, yes, but the shadow study is the initial part.
Yeah, that's what CEQA's for. And so there is a shadow study. I haven't seen it, but we'll all get to see it in the draft EAR, and you'll be able to see how your property is affected at different times of the year.
And that'll be for both the tower and without the tower.
Right. Yeah. And that's, and all the
tower,
various.
The tower was shading our property.
Okay.
I'm not sure that an 85-foot building would.
Okay.
Right.
Well, that's what CEQA's for. It's to understand all the various types of impacts and, including those properties closest to the site.
Right. And in some ways, if it shades properties that otherwise might be able to have solar, then you could say that might be an energy impact.
Yes, and that also brings up a second question from me, which is, we have been very concerned about, first of all, we're architects, we do mostly residential work, smaller, a few high-end multiple family units or single family. But yeah, so we've been really concentrating on zero net energy in our, passive solar in our design. And I'm wondering, how do you figure those issues into your project? Zero net energy, passive solar, carbon neutral. I mean, I just finished a new house that was built with no gas, runs on 20 solar panels. It works great.
So the question is, are there things like energy efficiency that are taken into account in designing, or have you not gotten to that stage yet?
We certainly have, and I mean, the sustainability and environmentally responsible design has been kind of integral to all the projects we've ever done. And now the requirement is, it's not a requirement, soon will be, but we're committed to being all electric. which is, you know, a really important first move. And I think communities all over are going that way. We would also integrate solar to the extent we can to generate power. It's really tricky on multifamily because of the way net metering works. So what you can definitely do is use solar to offset common area electric, but there's not really a clear way to do it when you've got, you know, 500 units all with a separate meter, and it doesn't really work to do a house meter. So that gets a little more complicated. But things about like material selection and, you know, water retention, and, you know, we have great opportunity to deal with water on site because we've got such a large landscape area, you know, and just orienting, designing the building in a way that it is efficient is kind of central to everything, you know, we do. And I think if it doesn't have a requirement, you know, we would certainly, you know, achieve a pretty high level of energy performance, or, you know, LEED sustainability, whether it's a silver or gold, whatever it is pretty typical for what we would shoot for.
So you don't know
Net
exactly.
zero is pretty tough on multifamily.
Yeah, you haven't committed yourself to any LEED level of.
We haven't. We're, you know, we're still a ways from that, but, you know, it's a really important element of any project that we do, and I think that anybody does these days. So it'll be a part of, you know, when we really get into the design, it's going to become increasingly important to focus on.
Any other people have questions?
I think
Brian has a question.
Oh, Brian, go ahead.
Hi, Mark and John. Forgive me if this is ground that's already covered, but I'm curious how you thought about what the resident population would look like and how you see that reflected in the unit mix, if you could speak to that.
You know, it's pretty standard fare for kind of new construction. It's twos, which are probably more for families, or roommates, ones, and studios, kind of run of the mill. People who are I mean, it's all self-selected. It's market rate, you know, housing, at least for the part that's not income restricted. People who are attracted to Rockridge, you know, it's probably not going to be that different of a population. People who want to be a close walk to BART or some of the bus lines. People who want, you know, convenient access up to the East Bay Hills. You know, I mean,
And
Rockridge
you
is.
know, for families and for folks who also really take advantage of the outdoor space, you know, I think that's going to be a big attraction.
And having this 2-acre park is pretty cool.
Yeah.
Totally is. I'm curious, does that expand into 3-bedroom units, or you cap it at 2?
Right now we're at 2.
Mhm.
Right now we're at 2. We're trying to do. It's hard to get things to pencil. You know, construction costs have just continued escalating, and you know, rents have dropped so much. So the 3 bedrooms are, you know, they're less efficient that way than the 2s. So you need a little room to make them work. So
That was one thing I was wondering about is last time we talked, there was a real big question about whether the project was going to pencil out, and you were hoping that construction costs might drop some with COVID. Is any of that materialized?
no,
No.
no, it's pretty bad. I mean, right now, if we were entitled, we could not start construction. There's no way we would get financing, because any lender or any investor is going to say, okay, what are the rents at your comps? And it's a bloodbath, right? Oakland was blessed with like so much housing the past couple of years, supply and demand. There is like tons of supply now, and the demand, you know, has just dropped off. And so the rents were going to drop anyway, just from the straight delivery of supply. But then you get COVID happening, and you know, you're down 20%. You're down 20%, and so the numbers, as we know from looking at the performance last spring, barely worked. And that was at current rents last year. So now the rents have gone down 20%, and the construction costs have not gone down. So though, I mean, this is a project for multiple generations. You know, I mean, it's such a great site, and you've got the BART infrastructure there, and you know, Rockridge is so charming. It's got to work at some point. That's our belief. That's why we're putting all this time and money and effort into it. But it wouldn't be today. We just you couldn't start anything today. You would never get the financing.
Other questions?
Diana, you had a question?
Yes. Going back to impact on the neighborhood, as Glenn mentioned, shadows, wind, view, whatever. What I'm concerned about is for the people who live in that neighborhood and or work in the neighborhood, parking. Because how much parking are you going to make available to people in the residence there, and in the building?
Yeah,
Because see, overflow parking would have people parking on my neighbor's streets. They not being able to park in front of their own home, and so wondering how much parking, and the last time I looked, it was what, 0.5 of a car. I mean, that's half a vehicle. So unless you have a electric bike or you have a small electric vehicle, you are not going to be able to get in a typical vehicle for parking. And if you're going to have upwards of 500 people, or 500 units, people, how is it going to translate into how much parking you're going to make available in that building or for the residents?
yeah. I mean, there's, we've been on these calls and meetings where people want no parking. There's like people that, I ride my bike. I take my daughters to school on a bike, and then I ride my bike in the office. And a lot of people are commuting by biking and by other means.
Right.
And the site is so well served by transit. So we're getting pressure to have no parking. There's some people, I remember some of the early meetings we had in 2017, they wanted over one spot per unit. So, where we've landed at is kind of in the middle. It's like this 0.5 to 0.6.
Yeah.
I know there's, it's been a while, but people did voice concerns about parking on the streets. A great solution to that we've seen implemented is permit parking. A neighborhood could ask to have stickers, and the people in this building would be able to get those stickers. And that's something that's not currently being used. But I don't know, we have a number of projects in San Francisco, and we've parked them from anywhere from 0.25 to 1 to 1 to 1, and we have a lot of empty parking spaces. And we've a couple that are 100 Van Ness is 0.25 to 1. It's mostly full. 150 Van Ness right next to it is 0.5 to 1. There's tons of spaces. It's probably, the real number is probably 0.35.
Okay.
There's a movement. It's going on. I mean, there's less people that are owning cars. People are using car share.
Yeah.
I honestly believe that I think that 0.5 to 0.6 is right about,
Yeah.
right
Well,
about right.
the only problem I see with that is that, older people will still have a vehicle. Also, too, it's great, to ride your bike, but when you go food shopping, this isn't Europe. I lived in Europe for 3 years, and you go shopping every day because they don't have the huge refrigerators that we have here in the United States, and room sizes and whatever aren't the same as here in the United States. However, getting back to food shopping, whatever, you're still going to need a car.
And there are. I'm sorry.
I just want want to kind of figure out what we're going to do to make sure that the people who live there already and do have vehicles and can't. There are some people who can't ride a bike because of arthritis, whatever. When they need their vehicle, that they'll be able to come back and park in front of their own home. That's in case they don't have a driveway.
A lot of the Ubers and Lyfts, and we designed the project that has a turnaround because it's a dead end, of course, it clipped in, so cars will be able to pull onto the side and turn around. There's a lot of food delivery services. I mean, less and less people are driving. That's why we think that this 0.5 to 0.6 probably gets you in the right spot.
Mark, are you familiar with other projects in Oakland, recent projects, and what sort of ratios they're using and how the parking is working for those? Because this is not San Francisco, obviously.
Right, it's not, I don't recall off the top of my head. John, do you recall?
I don't. We had some of that information on some of the more recent projects up and down Broadway. I don't happen to have it handy at my fingertips now.
Okay.
Yeah,
That was-
it's Greg Pasquale. I can just chime in on that, I mean, the city's new parking guidelines in downtown require 0. Obviously, this is not downtown, but it is walkable to BART and AC Transit. A lot of projects that are the new buildings you're seeing just finishing up right now, they're in the 0.5 to 0.65, 0.7 range. The sort of 1-to-1 era of 1 parking space per unit. Even 5 years ago, you would have had a very hard time getting that done in Oakland. Planning staff just won't really support that.
I mean, the other thing about it is, of course, you're paying for parking, and that may be one reason why it might make sense to do permit parking around there, is because although this is, given this market rate, probably the paying for parking is not a huge thing for people. They're not going to be saying, oh, well, I'm not going to park here because I don't want to have to pay the parking fees. If it's market rate, I think that the parking fees aren't going to be a stumbling block. But it does mean that some people may decide they don't want to have a car.
And we've noticed that phenomena in San Francisco. We've had a number of people that have moved to San Francisco to take a job, and they've moved into the building with their car, and they're paying a few $100 a month for parking. And after about 6 months, they're like, screw this, and they get rid of their car. And this project is going to have car share spots in it, like all of our buildings do. And so there's mechanisms that are in place to make it easy to go to the grocery store without owning a car. You just go downstairs and swipe your thing, and you take the car off, and you're paying by the hour instead of having to pay insurance and gas and all that other stuff.
Yeah.
Ronnie, you have a question?
Yes, in terms of the car usage and other things, there's a building, a development kitty corner from you on Broadway and 51st. That's
Right.
market rate. What have you been able to find out what their parking is? And are they parked? Because they were doing fairly high. I don't know if they were 1-to-1, but they were fairly high. I mean, this is a well-to-do neighborhood. And while you can walk to BART from there, it's not within the half mile that's typically cited as the walkable type of distance. So I'm just wondering, for comparison, have you looked at what the whatever the name of that is?
The Baxter on Broadway you're talking about, right?
Baxter, yeah.
It is 0.6, like the distance from the campus to the BART is 0.6, so it's close to that 0.5. But I'm just doing this from memory. I think they're overparked. I think when we went there were a lot of empty spaces that they're trying to lease that the residents were taking. Because I think they might be around 1-to-1. I'm totally speculating though. But John, do you remember? We have this data. We know it. I just don't know it off the top of my head.
Yeah, it's been a while. We can gather that information.
Yeah, I think it's 1-to-1, but I'm not sure on that either. It's been a
My
while.
memory was that they did 1-to-1, but I was just wondering how much it was parked up, because they're so it's a very direct comparison.
Yeah, when we toured it, which it's been toured a couple times, but the last time was maybe a year and a half ago. It was certainly well before COVID. It wasn't full. They were I don't know if they're going out to the neighbors, but they were trying to get some more revenue.
Well, they also weren't fully leasing. They've had a problem.
Yeah, Jennifer, you had a question?
Actually, Joe had a comment that I think if you could, it's in the chat, if you could respond to.
So let's see, that was,
Okay.
Let me read it. Actually, Joe, why don't we just unmute you and you can make your comment as a question.
Well, I was very happy to lurk here, but I will read it. Okay, so the reality and the dream. Okay, so I live in a 198 unit condominium HOA across the street. So I go down to the parking lot. Well, do I see scooters, bicycles, roller skates in the parking spots? No, almost every parking spot is filled. So the dream may be people are going to take scooters, but the reality is they still love their cars.
Mm.
That's it.
Yeah, however, if you find that, like the question becomes, if you don't provide the parking, it becomes somewhat of a selection criteria. And it doesn't necessarily mean people don't come. It may change, how people behave, which is the hope, honestly. And so I again, if you provide lots of parking, yeah, you may be able to fill it. We have the added problem here is that, we also can't afford to build it because it adds significant costs. So if we're all saying, geez, we'd like to, reduce the size of the project or add more affordable or have more amenities, it's in direct contradiction to building more parking. So we're trying to strike the balance of what works, what is enough parking to make sure that we can lease the building and we have a good diversity of folks living there, but we don't overpark it in such a way that, hey, either, you take away units or you take away affordability because you're building so much parking, which also then generates more traffic. So, we're trying to strike that balance, and we think we've kind of hit a spot, and it seems to be, we're not alone. There are many projects that are really focused kind of in this range of 0.5 to 0.65 per unit.
Jennifer,
you have a question?
Yeah. Oh, you're muted.
Okay, yeah. I don't really see a problem with 0.5 to 0.6 parking spaces per unit if that it's like almost part of the lease that in the city's in agreement that you can't get a street parking permit, that if the building's restricted in that fashion, and when you go to rent the apartment, okay, I either get a parking space here with the building, and I might have to pay through the nose for it, but and then the city, though, of course, has to be able to enforce that, which they haven't exactly done a great job of. So they might need some extra funds to pay for another person to parking meter made to patrol the streets. But it really is something where a lot of the smaller streets, especially around there, don't have garages, or they've already converted them to ADUs or whatever, and so they have to park on the street for their own homes.
I mean, the solution really is the resident permit parking process. I mean, it's worked
Right.
out.
I would agree. But would the city agree to something like that the people in the building cannot get they can't get the street parking permits?
I can respond to that a little bit because we came up against this with the project on Telegraph between 51st and Claremont, because when that came up, the city was, or at least some people in the city planning department and planning commission were saying, well, we can't restrict parking. We can't do that sort of thing. We can't say that if you live in this building, you can't get a residential permit parking. But what RCPC did was we negotiated with the developers, and we got a private agreement that they would restrict the parking. So the city wasn't involved in that, and that might be something to do here or think about.
Yeah, that's something that we can look at. I think it's going to require the neighborhood to actually get stickers, because my understanding is that there's not stickers there, so you need to have the stickers in order to ban people from having the stickers. Right. But
you'd have to.
That's something that we would be open to. We don't think it's going to impact the neighborhood, the overflow. So we wouldn't.
That's a possible solution if there were that problem developed. Have you thought at all about what the long-term effect after COVID is going to be in terms of behaviors, and does that modify what type of building you'd build or what type of plans you'd make for who'd be living there? Like I'm thinking particularly of the work from home change.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that we're providing a park, I think, is good for the outdoor space. The fact that there's going to be all these cool places to hang out outside. And, if you are going to work from home, to do your work out there and sit on that kind of terrace seating and have your coffee and, call into your meetings or whatever. But I think that the core returns. I think that people like to go out to dinner and walk there and meet their friends and have drinks. And that's density and that's urban living. And, Rockridge, it's not downtown San Francisco, but it's dense enough that you get the benefit of the shops and the restaurants. And I think that's going to be pretty appealing to people. So I'm a believer in urban living. I don't think it changes. I think people are going to hunger for it. I think this summer, if we're really going to get all these vaccines in May, I think we're going to see a just explosion of people wanting to be out and actually seeing other people. And that's going to cause a return to living in these urban areas.
It may change how much people are commuting, though.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it'll factor that, is it worth it to live in Tracy if you only have to come in 3 days a week instead of 5 days a week? Some people will make that decision. They'll make that choice. But, I think the core is still gonna, even if you're only going there a few days a week, you want to be able to, people like to walk. Walkability is a real thing. And this is a super walkable neighborhood.
And we've already intended, pre-COVID to incorporate some kind of co-work and, spaces where people can work either in their unit, but also within the project where they can go and, have small meetings or just have a, hot desk work environment. And I could see that, more demand for that, because people are getting more used to working remote. So I think that it may evolve a bit, in that direction as we develop the design. We'll kind of see how the market shifts.
Okay. Other questions? I had one more question, and I hate to ask this question, but have you thought at all about phasing? About whether you're going to do the whole thing or whether you might phase it?
Well,
I hate asking that question because, as you may know, that's what happened with the shops at the Ridge project, and phase 2 never got built.
Right. Now, I think we were looking at, if you're talking about one of those preservation alternatives that planning asks us to look at, where you're only doing one building of housing, or maybe it's one big one and one small one, and then you have got a bunch of historic buildings that you're converting to office, that would have to be phased, because we don't know what the office market, you're looking for a pretty specific user for that office. And so there's a scenario there where maybe you build the residential and you just don't build the office until you find a tenant for the office, or until the market comes back. So those buildings kind of sit there. And
But if you go the full residential, you do the whole project at once.
Yeah, I think so.
It's pretty hard. It's a difficult site to phase, honestly, because the access is so restricted that, it would be very cumbersome. And you have to build the building at Broadway and Clifton first with all the parking, and then you built all the parking, to serve everything. And then having access to that top part of the site for a complicated construction project down the road is not an easy thing to manage. So I think there's a lot of reasons why we'd want to do it all at once.
This is Casey. I just wanted to reflect that I really think the outdoor space is in very high demand. You can see at Frog how those beautiful enhancements that this board had a lot to do with create just a beautiful outpouring of folks gathering there, hopefully keeping their 6-foot distance, but there's not a lot of space based on all the kids in the neighborhood. So I think more seniors having access to just lawn space for exercise, there's so many values to that particular need, and the cost of land is so high. We're not going to get a beautiful new park, nor can the city maintain them as nicely as we'd all like. But I really feel like this is a beautiful asset.
Thanks. Jennifer? You're muted.
Also a new mom, so I'm particularly, we did our first park day with twins, so really excited about public parks.
Congratulations, go Twins. Diana's a twin. Joe, are you a twin too? No, I have twins.
So
I
with,
am a twin.
this goes kind of with Stu's post-COVID question. Everybody's getting dogs, right? I don't have a dog. I know the dog park, the only dog run is down there at Frog Park.
Right.
Have you thought of putting in any kind of a dog park anywhere on the property? Is there room for it?
I don't know. It's always, we got to figure out what, what's going on with the design of the buildings and all that. That kind of comes later.
Yeah.
But it's, we tend to allow dogs in our buildings, but finding the place for the dog rooms, it stinks, right? It's pee. It's like, it's a full-time job just getting rid of the pee smell, like closing it down. We've done all this research, gone on all these buildings that have, the thing on the roof or the alley, and the operating costs are huge. So we tend to have pretty high dog owner percentage in our buildings, and they find parks is kind of or trees. We have a lot of dead trees in front of our properties because the dogs pee on the trees.
I was curious. I don't have a dog, but I was just curious.
Diana?
I do have a dog. This is my husband and I, our third dog, June. She's a Aussie Shepherd, Belgian Malinois mix. Loves everybody. Everybody loves her, including the fire department and the police department, everybody. Anyway, and the postal people. But we, every day, she meets her buddies down at Frog Park, and she doesn't go into the enclosure because she doesn't like to be, bombarded by 16 other dogs. However, walking along the pathway and all is very, very good. And with the cypress trees, everything. What you have to do is, and we do this every week, we make sure, check with, new people who are new to the neighborhood, make sure that they are picking up after their dogs. Okay.
Right.
The dogs have to be picked up after. So if you have an outdoor area, you can do that. And it doesn't have to be huge. If you come down here, I'll show you, where our dog walks and the dog enclosure. So you can see that it won't be, it doesn't have to be huge. And I'd be happy to take Laura on a tour of, Lower Rockridge here. I live on Shafter and at Hudson, right across the street from Colonel Shafter's house. So I'd be happy to take her around or take you around, Mark. As long as your wife doesn't jump on me. But, I'd be happy to take you around and show you. And also show you the different styles of homes, not just craftsmen, but different styles of homes that we have here. So, I think you can accommodate, pets. You can accommodate the elderly, and you can accommodate small families, because you're not going to get a big family in a 2-bedroom apartment. And then young people, of course, young people in their 30s and 40s and 50s, they'll love this area.
Yeah.
They'll love this area.
Yeah.
So Mark, were your townhouses you had designed, were those meant to be 2-bedroom or 3-bedroom? The one that you originally, because
I don't remember. There's a couple of floors. I don't know if we had 2 or 3 floors, 2 or 3 bedrooms, but we might be able to have 3 bedrooms in those. John, do you remember?
No, I don't think we actually laid them out because that kind of evolved, but they are bigger. So you're right. It might be possible that those could be 3-bedroom units.
Yeah.
The idea, this is before we kind of stop, but it was lining the ground areas with townhouses. So you've got it going up Clifton, you've got it along the park, and then following UBA suggestion, you'd have it along Broadway too, and then you'd have it up top there by the opening of the promenade. So you're kind of lined with active uses, stoops and whatnot, and activating all those spaces.
Yeah, you had those at like 1,200 feet. So
yeah, you could definitely do a 3-bedroom at 1,200 feet. Yeah.
So I think it's getting to be 8:45, and we do have a couple of other things that I wanted to bring up. So I'm wondering, unless there are other questions, maybe we call this presentation to a close.
Yeah, thank you all again. This is, I don't know how many times we've met before you and you've given us your time. So there'll be a few more before we're done with this. But year 5, I'm hoping we can get it done in 6. I'm hoping we can. And then we'll write books about it. And then maybe we'll actually even build it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you
All right,
both.
thanks,
Yeah,
everyone.
you.
We're always
Thank
you.
available.
Bye.
You can get a hold of us.
Aye.
Those
Ask
those
questions.
of you who are members or would like to listen in on the rest of the meeting, we do have a couple of other items on the agenda that I wanted to quickly bring up. Those are, one of them is if you remember from last time, we were looking at trying to find someone to do the analysis on the various incentives. And there was a subcommittee set up to look at that. And while I got a report back that they have not yet been able to find a meeting time. So I'm hoping that by next month they'll have met and gotten somewhere on that. The other thing that I had just started on last time, and I've done a little bit more work on, was talking to some of the other associations, primarily merchant associations, but also neighborhood associations in the neighborhood commercial areas in Oakland. And the results sort of surprised me, but essentially all of the managers of those commercial areas, of the merchant associations, all were pretty optimistic about the survival of those areas as commercial areas and the viability of local neighborhood commercial. They all say, I'm still needing to talk to a couple more, but so far the results seem to be that people are feeling that they are going to survive, although they may have to adapt somewhat. They said a number of the stores in the areas were saying that, as in Rockridge, a lot of the storefronts have also added an online component. So they're not going entirely online, but they're allowing people, if they want to order online and then maybe pick up at the store. So that's something that is perhaps somewhat optimistic in terms of the future of College Avenue, but we still need to look at that some more. But I wanted to give you an update on that. The one other thing I wanted to mention, which was something that I was asked to bring up by the people from the Rockridge District Association, was there have been a couple of exercise studios that have opened, and they have opened with frosted windows. So the storefronts you cannot see into the storefront from the street. And the question was, how do we feel about this having storefronts that are essentially blocked off from public view? That had been maybe 10 years ago, it was a no-no. And in fact, the city planning department wouldn't allow people to do that. It seems like planning department has gotten more lenient on that. I'm wondering what people feel about doing that.